Module 11, Buddhist Painting in the Tang Dynasty, dated to 618 to 906. I, Dr. Rita Pratap, former head of the Department of Drawing and Painting, University of Rajasthan, Jaipur. I am going to speak on Japanese paintings, that is, Buddhist painting in the Tang Dynasty. The change in style of Chinese Buddhist art in the 6th and early 7th centuries was accompanied by a change in content. The old favorite subjects, the life of a previous life of Buddha, began to give way to a more complex themes, that is, Lotus Sutra, Buddhist scriptures, and the other Sukhavati Vyuha, land of bliss. It was during the period of Tang Emperor Husan Tusung that the climax of imperial patronage of Buddhism came. A galaxy of famous painters led by Wu Tao Zu were vying with each other, creating religious scrolls and wall paintings, of which 300 frescoes were in the temples of Loyang and Chugan. The use of gold to outline the rocks was a technique often employed by Chinese court painters to give their landscape added richness and splendors. Buddhist painting in the Tang Dynasty, dated to 618 to 906. Buddhist painting in the Tang Dynasty encompassed two major formats, the wall painting and the portable painting in hanging scroll and hand scroll form. The wall paintings decorated in either temples or interiors of caves and were painted both by anonymous artisans and by painters of celebrated excellence. One of the greatest names in all Chinese painting is that of the legendary Wu Tao Tuzu, who was active from 710 to 760 CE, creator of Buddhist wall paintings and reputed as the greatest Chinese figure painters, as the works of renowned painters have almost all vanished. Works of anonymous artisans of Tang painting style have to be looked upon. The change in style of Chinese Buddhist art in the 6th and early 7th centuries was accompanied by a change in content. The old favorite subjects, the life and the previous life of the Buddha, and the pearls from which the Avalokiteshvara saves mankind, began to give way to a more complex themes, reflecting the popularity of the two texts in later Mahayana Buddhism. One was the Lotus Sutra. The sutras are the Buddhist scriptures, a lengthy book expounding the eternal existence and infinite power of the Buddha. The other called the Sukhavati Vyuha, description of the land of bliss. The illustrations to the former include parables and miracles, such as the miraculous appearance of the stupa containing the Buddha of the previous cycle, Prabhu Ratna. Those inspired by the later text include elaborate compositions illustrating the pleasures of the four paradise beyond the horizon, notably the western paradise of Amitabha, with its luxuriant trees, its pavilions and refreshing streams, its musicians, singers and dancers who perform for the delight of the myriad being clustered around the radiant figure of Amitabh. Paradise of Amitabh Buddha from Tunhuang, Gansu province, belonging to Tang Dynasty. It is a hanging scroll, ink and color on silk, and at present in the British Museum, London. Amitabha Buddha is seated in a lotus position, is surrounded by bodhisattvas and monks with Central Asian influences still evident in the modeling and shading of the figures. The rich details of this sumptuous paradise probably reflect the worldly splendor of the Tang capital at Chang'an. According to the Pure Land school of Mahayana Buddhism, one simply needed to worship Amitabha Buddha faithfully to guarantee one's rebirth into Western paradise. Western paradise, fresco from Tunhuang, Gansu, China, Tang Dynasty, dated to second half of the 8th century. This is the representation of Western paradise with the Buddha Amitabha flanked by two principal bodhisattvas, many minor bodhisattvas and other deities of paradise. Most of deities are seated on a high dais protected by canopies, flanked by pavilions and fronted by lotus pond with platforms on which a celestial dance is in progress. On either side are raised platforms holding other deities of the Western paradise. The whole is a transcription in paint of passages from Sukhavati Vyuha, Amitayus and Dhyane Sutra, Buddhist texts that describe the Western paradise and the pleasures of being there were the Amitabha Buddha. Though none of the paradise scenes from the great temples of Tang capitals, Loyang and Chang'an have survived, but a detail of a scroll from Tunhuang hoard discovered by Sir Aurel Steen shows paradise of Bhai Sajya Guru and gives some idea of the complexity of design, richness of color and overall mastery with which the Chinese painter at last succeeded in expressing Indian sculpture form in the language of Chinese brush. In Japan, the most perfect series of paradise painting was until recently found was on the walls of Kondo, Golden Hall of Horyu-ji Monastery Temple in Nara. A detail of one of the bodhisattvas attended on the Buddha Amitabha is illustrated here. But unfortunately, the Kondo paintings were almost completely destroyed by fire in January 1949. The treasures recovered from Tunhuang by Sir Aurel Steen is also a fragment of painted silk which depicts the courtiers, here transformed into young Chinese gentlemen, who searched the countryside for the young prince Siddhartha Shakyamuni after he escaped from his father's palace. The decorative way in which the plants are spaced out is a mark of Near Eastern influence, but the full curves of the horsemen and with which rich coloring are typical of Chinese painting of the Tang Dynasty, and the way they are partly hidden behind the hill is an ancient convention of Chinese landscapists. In Tang China, many images were also modeled in clay. The cave of Tunhuang number 196 has beautiful painted altar and gilded clay sculptures. It is a dry fresco wall and ceiling of cave 196, Tunhuang, Gansu, China, belonging to Tang Dynasty, dated to 8th century. They are beautiful and well preserved assemblies. The Four Manifestations of Avalokiteshvara, Guanyin, dated to year 864, ink and paint on silk, Tunhuang Cave number 17 and at present in the British Museum, London. In his headdress, Avalokiteshvara wears a depiction of the Buddha Amitabh. He is accompanied by Samantabhadra Puxian on an elephant and Manjushri Venshu on a lion. They can be identified by their attributes and the animals they ride. Here, the iconography of Buddhism is particularly interesting, for it enriched Chinese art with many new themes and much new subject matter. Samantabhadra Puxian, dated to 8th to 9th centuries AD, ink and paint on silk. It is a banner found from Tunhuang Cave number 17 at present in the British Museum, London. Samantabhadra riding an elephant is shown in the Varada Mudra position. Scroll repeatedly imprinted by a seated Buddha. Belongs to 9th century, ink and paper, colored later. It is at present in the British Museum, London. Illustration to the Sutra of 10 Kings of Hell. It is a detail of a hand scroll dated to 9th century AD and at present in the British Museum, London. This detail shows on the left Kshit Garbha, who according to Buddhist belief can save souls from hell. Monk in attitude of meditation. It is a 9th century painting, ink on paper and at present in the British Museum, London. Probably a portrait of an ideal type rather than an actual individual. The picture shows a monk in a trance enveloped in a voluminous robes. He can hardly have been ascetic, for he is shown as rather fleshy, but even the economical strokes of the outline makes it clear that his eyes are fixed on a distance in meditation. His prayer mat, a water bottle, a wallet and a string of prayer beads, in Sanskrit Akshat Mala, similar to Roman Catholic rosary, show that he is a traveler. The wallet and prayer beads hang on the gnarled leafless tree. The picture, painted entirely in liner style, comparable to the woodcuts of sacred art in the West. Wei-Ch hovers over the water. It is ink and paint on silk and at present in the British Museum, London. The guardians of faith are very different in appearance. Wei-Ch, one of the 4 Devrajas, guardian kings, is shown here dressed as a military officer. A cloud bears the guardian king of the north and his retinue over the water. His sister Shri Devi is in front of him, holding a golden vessel containing flowers, and a number of assistants, some with the heads of demons, stand behind. The Devrajas are depicted as warriors in the battle against evil. Iconographically, Wei-Ch can be identified by the 2-pronged spear in his right hand and the pagoda held up on the cloud in his left hand. The colorful group is set against a stylized landscape with curling waves, while mountains appear as simple triangular shapes in the background. Demons fly through the air overhead. Kshit Garbha, seated in the meditation position. Early 10th century AD, ink and paint on silk and at present in the British Museum, London. This is Kshit Garbha, whose importance to the faithful lies in his ability to snatch souls back from the hell and return them to the cycle of favorable reincarnations. He is therefore a savior in their time of greatest need and is depicted with his staff and a jewel in the illustrations to the Sutra of 10 Kings of hell. Kshitgarbha was a bodhisattva, one whose whole being is enlightenment, regarded by the believers as someone who would help and intercede for them. The boyish figure of the donor is shown below Kshitgarbha, scenes from the life of the historical Buddha. It is a detail of a banner dated to 8th to 9th centuries AD and at present in the British Museum, London. This section shows Buddha saying farewell. The scene in his ascent from the world of earthly dust, his farewell, his cutting of his hair, his simple life surrounded by flowers. The landscape of the background illustrates the style of landscape painting in the Tang period. Paradise of Shakyamuni, early 9th century AD, British Museum, London. This is an illustration from the Bio and Sutra frame, the densely crowded composition. The central theme, the Buddha enthroned in front of a palace which has a great deal of ornamental roof decoration and is extremely reminiscent of Tang palace architecture, is framed to right and left by the Jataka story of the flight, a subject of the Bio Sutra. The center of the picture is occupied by the heavenly musicians. The donors are ranged below the central motif. On the right, men in the wade hats, a typical form of a headgear in the Tang period, and on the left, ladies with their hair dressed high. The painting of all the figures in this picture, both in terms of composition and in depiction of their clothing, is a simple style that has not yet been ever elaborated. Another Buddhist hanging scroll of the 9th century is the fragment in ink and color on silk, discovered by Aurel Steen in 1907 in Tunhuang. At upper right, the painting bears a title, Bodhi-sattva, Guide of Souls. In his right hand, the supple and superbly clad Bodhisattva holds a censer. In his left, a flowering lotus and a white brocade temple banner. The Bodhisattva is guiding a saved soul, wafted along on stylized clouds or breezes through a gentle rain of blossoms, symbolizing sensitivity towards the palaces of the Western paradise. At the upper left, the soul's lady, plump, chic, and dressed in the height of the mid-Tang fashion type. Birth of Buddha from the scenes from the life of Buddha. Fragment of border of large mandala, ink and color on cloth, Tunhuang, Kansu, China, Tang Dynasty, and at present in the National Museum, New Delhi. The farthest reaches of the international Buddhist style of the Tang Dynasty is found in the little nude figure of the Buddha and the trees. The landscape with its receding hills and mountains and great distant peaks is more sophisticated. Tang painting foreign technique. Under Southern Liang Dynasty, Chang Sheng Yu, early 6th century, was the most famous court painter. Chang Sheng Yu had been specially noted for his power to suggest modeling in the Indian manner by arbitrary shading, that is, without indicating a source of light or using cast shadows. Sheng Yu was also much admired for his flowers in relief, painted with so thick an impasto that they actually stand out from the temple wall. The Tang artist Wei-Ch l-seng, dated to 7th century, a descendant, perhaps the son of an immigrant from Khotan in Central Asia, also practiced a realistic style of flower painting, but he was specially noted for his foreign manner of painting figures. An example is of two girls standing beside a tree. It is a hand scroll and at present in Baronson collection, Florence. Here the lines of the drapery worn by the girls is being tight and strong like bending iron or coiled wire. No original from the hand of either of these masters survives, but a detail of what may well be an accurate copy of one of Wei-Ch l-seng works by 11th century painter Chen-yung-chi is illustrated. Example is of a Buddha under a mango tree. It is a detail from a hanging scroll after Wei-Ch l-seng about 1023, ink and color on paper, and at present in the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. It depicts Buddha Shakyamuni walking in the garden of Jetwan Monastery, his headquarters during the later years of his ministry. The Indian features of Buddha, the tight wire-like lines of the drapery, the rich luxuriant foliage of the blossoming trees, the flower-strewed rocks painted with a thick pigment to produce an effect almost of flowers in relief, all suggest a blending of foreign techniques with refinement of drawing that is purely Chinese. The use of gold to outline the rocks was a technique often employed by Chinese court painters to give their landscapes added richness and splendor. Wu Taozu, about 700 to 760, proclaimed as the greatest master of Buddhist painting and reputedly the greatest figure painter in Chinese history. Wu occupies a position in tongue painting roughly comparable to that of Michelangelo in Renaissance Italy. The tongue art historian Zhang Yan-yuan states in his record of famous painters of successive dynasties, preface dated 847, that Wu Taozu painted more than 300 frescoes in the temples of Luoyang and Chang'an. Because he was not a great colorist, he left coloring to his assistants if it was to be added at all. A 12th century writer who had seen only copies of his work said Wu figures reminded him of sculpture. Several of Wu's people became sculptors, one because they thought sculpture an easier craft than painting. It is said that in painting his genius lay rather in the wonderful screen power and sureness of his brush line, likened by his contemporaries to the speed of the skill of an expert swordsman. It lay too in his endless invention of his designs and his power to suggest both movement and solid three-dimensional form by the modulation in direction and thickness of his brush line alone. Though not a single line from Wu's own brush survives, but hints of his style can be seen in many details from the later caves in Tunhuang, style of Wu Taozu. The sage Vimalakirti debating with Samantrabhadra, details from Tunhuang Caves number 103 belonging to Tang Dynasty, and in the Japanese ink study of a Bodhisattva preserved in the Shoshoji at Nara. Wu's power as designer of large-scale figure compositions was handed down through the centuries, chiefly by anonymous painters of religious and ceremonial subjects on the walls, temples, palaces, and Tung Chi Hsi's ancestral shrines. Buddhist wall paintings from Yung Ko Lung dated to 14th century, and Tung Chi Hsin and wood engravings Diamond Sutra wood block from the hand scroll dated to 868 and at present in BM, London. Recent discoveries include wall paintings from early Tang princely tombs, female attendants dated to 706. This is a wall painting from tomb of Princess Yogintine, Qin Hisan, Shaanxi, China, belonging to Tang Dynasty. These sophisticated figural compositions of court ladies and attendants show the evidence of portable works on silk. It was during the period of Tang Emperor Husan Tusung, who reigned from 713 to 756, the climax of imperial patronage of Buddhism came during the glorious half-century. A galaxy of famous painters led by Wu Taozu were vying with each other in the creation of religious scrolls and wall paintings. But after the Great Rebellion of 756, court patronage of the arts declined, while Buddhism itself was soon to come under the attack from both Confucianists and Taoists as a foreign and un-Chinese religion, whose service was impoverishing the state. Between 843 and 845 decrees were issued. All foreign religions were proscribed. Hundreds of temples were pulled down or converted to other uses, and tens of thousands of monks and nuns secularized. The result was that very small and easy portable scrolls and images survived. Besides that, Buddhist wall paintings and melting precious icons were destroyed. Although the decrees against Buddhism were related after few years, it never regained its preeminent position in Chinese life. Nevertheless, wealthy citizens continued to build temples and pagodas up to modern times. Some of the finest existing buildings were erected in the 12th and 14th centuries.